Man, RoboCop 3 sucked. PG-13. No Peter Weller. Fuck out of here. RoboCop 2, though, is a little underrated, honestly. Also, very, very prescient. It actually has the city of Detroit declare bankruptcy and sell itself to a corporation, which is essentially what has happened. Detroit literally declared bankruptcy, and I think the Quicken company, Dan Gilbert's company, essentially owns the center of Detroit. They own all the buildings, and they have a private police force. There's also a great little meta commentary about the nature of making sequels in that movie. So there's so in RoboCop 2, you know, RoboCop he gets blown up in the line of duty and kind of taken offline, and he's lost his step. He's sort of turned into like a big pushover, and OCP decides to do a new RoboCop. Hey, people, the old one, they're sick of the old one. Let's get a new RoboCop. And so there's a very funny sequence where they show all of the trial attempts to do a RoboCop by getting another cop who'd been injured the way that Murphy had been, and then putting him in a robot suit. And the first one they show is a guy who kind of looks like an ATM, kind of like Roby the robot, and he just starts shooting. He says, "Stop and I'll shoot," and he starts shooting the lab assistants and then blows his head off. And then another guy comes out and he's got like the visor on, and he just grabs his helmet and pulls it off and starts screaming, and you see the top of his like bloody skull, and then he dies. And eventually they realize, oh, like Murphy was a very specific special case. It's lightning in a bottle, and not everybody is Murphy. You cannot do it to a normal person. And they ended up having to get Kane, the evil nuke dealer and creator, played by the great Tom Noonan, to be RoboCop 2, because they needed a literal psychopath to do it. They needed a heartless murderer to do it. I know you might say, but the cops, yes, propaganda, we all know, move on. And then he ends up literally opening fire on a room full of reporters, just massacring the shit out of them. It is definitely a warning about, like, hey, you get what you pay for with a sequel.
Yourselves.
And yeah, it also could be said to talk about the nature of policing itself. Like if policing is just the heartless enforcement of property rights, and property rights need more and more brutal enforcement in an era of austerity, then the person who does that job has to be a psycho. It's also the only sequel, I think, ever where the title is said by a character in the movie. The great Dan Herlihy, who also played Conwell Cochran in Halloween 3, introduces the psycho nuke addict RoboCop 2 at a press conference by saying RoboCop 2. I'm going to rewatch RoboCop 2. That movie is good.
Ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure, I give you RoboCop 2.
But obviously, you don't need a sequel to RoboCop. RoboCop's perfect. Why is every movie PG-13 now? Because only kids go to movies. Young people who still want to go out and do something go to movies. Nobody else does that anymore. At least not in the numbers you need to justify the fucking budgets. And the budgets have to be big because the returns have to be big. RoboCop has a sequel. RoboCop has 2 sequels. Less said about the third one, the better. It's not even R-rated. It's directed, I believe, by Frank Miller. Or he wrote the second one. I don't know if he directed the third one. Anyway, dog shit. Doesn't even have Peter Weller. It's got that Canadian guy. It literally had a Canadian, non-union Canadian equivalent of RoboCop. Phobocop, more like it. Zing. That's right, I said it. I called him Phobocop. Okay, Irvin Kershner, the same guy who did Empire Strikes Back. And you know what? It's not quite as, well, the thing is, it's not as good as Empire Strikes Back, but it's definitely better than its reputation. And and a lot of it's the fun of it is it's actually about like the making of a sequel. And the best sequence in that movie is when they show all of the attempts to make another RoboCop, and they fail because like the guy shows up and he just starts shooting the doctors and then blows his brains out, and one guy pulls his helmet off, revealing his screaming skull, and then dies. Just the way that like the artist, the human, revolts against the idea of a cash-based sequel. But even with all that, but with that kind of mindset, it's a good movie. Prescient in its way. It talks about Detroit being declared bankrupt and then sold to a company, which is essentially what has happened to Detroit. But there was another screenplay for RoboCop 2, not by Frank Miller, but by the writer of the first RoboCop, Ed Neumeyer. And they never ended up using it. And I have read it. It's online. You can find it. It's not good. I will say that. I mean, it's always hard with scripts, especially scripts that didn't get made, to imagine them in your head. But there's a lot in it that does not work. But there's one thing that's actually kind of just a throwaway that is so perfect that it almost redeems the entire project. So the premise is that RoboCop gets like ambushed and essentially disconnected. Like he gets his plug pulled, and he ends up in a warehouse for like 20 years before some scavengers grab him and try to reconnect him for reasons, and then he goes to war. And it's pitched at a much higher dramatic level than either the real RoboCop 2 or the first RoboCop. The stakes are much higher. It's like the fate of the planet and everything, which is often a thing that happens with sequels. But they mention in passing the president in this future world, and it's Bixby Snyder. And Bixby Snyder is the name of the "I'll buy that for $1" guy from RoboCop.
I'd buy that for $1.
The guy who's on TV every moment that they're watching television, except when it's Johnny Laser. And that's essentially what we got. We have President Bixby Schneider. We have President I'll buy that for $1 guy.